So you're a nonpartisan mayor. You're dealing with a Republican administration. Your background was Democratic Party affiliated in the sense that you were elected as a sheriff as a Democrat, and you had to be a Democrat to get elected in Wayne County. Did you feel you had a pretty good relationship, though, with, let's say, Nixon, Agnew, Romney, these Republicans that you had to deal with?
I tell you, one of the things that even though they may take a jab at each other here and there, but as a matter of fact, when running the country or running a city or running a state, you find them to be fairly level-headed, and if you approach them in a fair manner and without any, with about a hat in hand if needed to be, and,
right.
They would accomplish and help you. And statewide, with Milliken, I mean, I had a marvelous relationship. I consider him a friend now, and I see him from time to time over the years. And I was able to work with Spiro. He got into problems, of course, and then he had to resign. I remember I was there when Nixon signed the bill that called for revenue sharing. He had many of the big city mayors there to witness the signing, and we went to Philadelphia. That's where he signed it, and they had a press conference there, and we all met there. And I sat next to him, as I said, when the last year he had one or two meetings with the big city, with the mayor organizations. So the president of the league, that was myself, and the president of U.S. Conference of Mayors on the other side, and relevant cabinet members at the various meetings.
Well, do you feel that people in positions of responsibility, regardless of party affiliation or background, got along pretty well when you were mayor and at that time? Do you think, from what you have observed recently, that that's still the case, or do you think maybe there's not quite as much cooperation between people in various positions today as there was before? I'm not trying to put words in your mouth.
No, it's hard to read. I think it's there, but when you get into the political tempo of times, there are disagreements as to what to do. But once you're there, run the city for 4 years, run the governor's office for 4 years, you got to work together, and you do work together. Most of them, my experience is that they all do their job and help if they can. And if they
do you think, for instance, that Kwame Kilpatrick, mayor of Detroit right now, gets along as well with George W. Bush and his administration as you did?
That's
as
another
you did
problem
with Nixon?
In public affairs, you've got to be honest.
Yeah.
In public affairs, you've got to be scrupulous in what you do so that people know that everything that they see is correct and above board. When, God bless him, Kwame, a young man, when he bought a car and had it shipped to the police department to use by his wife and kids, now that's improper. That happened in the second year or third year. Yeah. And since then, now we're talking about him lying under oath and perjury charges, 8 charges. That's terrible. Yeah. It's a sad time. We're taping this in 2008, and we're just waiting to see what happens.
Let me ask you a question about relationship between the executive and the legislative branches. There's always tension between, let's say, President and Congress, between governors and legislatures, between mayors and what used to be the Detroit Common Council or the Detroit City Council. What was your relationship with the City Council and its members at that time?
Very good relationship. Remember, he had Mel Ravitz, who was council president.
Right.
Another member was Carl Levin, who's been our senator for, 24 years now? Yeah. And where's Bicky and Billy Rogel? Billy said to me when I took office, he said, he's a sweet guy, very blunt, very direct.
The old Detroit Tiger shortstop.
Exactly, sure. Yeah. And he said to me, kid, I'll never forget this. He was probably in 20, 30 years my senior. He said, there's only one thing that I insist on is the horses and that department. Leave them alone.
The horses.
Yeah, the mounted patrol.
He wanted the mounted patrols to continue.
He liked the mounted patrol.
He loved the
that was his
patrol.
favorite.
Yeah. So
his favorite.
Don't touch the mounted patrol.
Don't touch them. If you don't touch them,
everything else.
You and I get along. And I'll never forget that. I said, okay. And I didn't. Somewhere about the third year, the budget department came in and they were going to cut them by a couple of horses. I got a call from Billy. I said, Billy, relax. I'll correct it.
That's a classic.
He was a great guy.
That's good. Well,
and you know, we had some fine council people, and as you have mentioned, when I left office, Ravitz, who had been president for a long time, decided to run for mayor, and he gave up running for that position.
Right.
And Carl Evan ran. He became council president. A couple of years later, he was U.S. senator, and he's been there ever since. Magnificent.
Was there any? I don't even know if there was an African American, one or two on the council.
Yeah, Bill Patrick had been there ahead of me.
That's right, ahead of me.
And I thought Bill Patrick might run for mayor when I ran, but by that time he took a job in New York with the Bell Telephone, telephone company, and he was.
Well, but now today you got a completely different situation racially. You've got an African American mayor, and you've got an basically all black, except I think for one African American city council. They don't seem to be getting along too well.
I'm sorry to say that.
and I mean, Coleman Young actually had his problems with the city council, and so did Dennis Archer. So what's happened in the last 3 decades?
History will have to answer that. I do feel this, however. You know, one of the things that, when I was mayor, it was important to integrate the black community in the administration with qualified leadership. And that I had the ability to do.
Right.
And when the majority of black when the city of Detroit became a black majority, now it's about 85%. I mean, it's been many years, it's been 30 years. But then it was their job, it was Coleman's job to integrate the white community in the administration. Well, I think that was the mistake, starting with Coleman, because it's our turn, friend, you know, and it's my way or the roadway. And when I talked to mayors, when I became a judge, I would talk to suburban mayors, and dealing with Coleman 8, 10, 15 years after I left office. And then they said, how are you getting along? He says, terrible. He said, you got to do it Coleman's way or forget it. You know, now we're in charge, and that was his attitude. And that's not the right attitude. That's
not the right attitude. Did you know Coleman Young fairly well? He was a state senator while you were mayor. Yeah. Did you know the Detroit delegation very well? I mean, people like Mo Hood, and I mean, in the legislature.
Oh, I did. Pretty much, yeah. I would lean on them. And communicate with them.
And you had a pretty good relationship.
And we even had a lobbyist on our payroll in Lansing that would brief me as to what's happening and who to contact and that kind of stuff. And no, we relied on the Detroit legislators that was in the state of Michigan.
Did you feel that they had a certain amount of influence up here, and they really did help at key junctures?
Oh, sure.
And probably they worked pretty well with Milliken, didn't they?
What's the name of the guy that was on the east side? It was a state rep for 30 years.
Brian?
No.
He was a kind of maverick.
State rep.
Hertel?
No, that's before him. It'll come
a lot of names. Yeah. Anyway, he was a big help.
Well, he had been a state legislator for about 22 years, you know, and he would be. That's one of the beauties of having someone with experience. They would introduce legislation. Some would say, we're going to do it this way. He said, we tried that 12 years ago, and it doesn't work. Take my word for it. That's what experience.
So he had a history.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah. You don't have that now with term limitations.
Right. Okay, it's 1974. You've been out of the mayoralty for a year. You want to be a judge. You run for a Wayne County Circuit judgeship. Right. How did that go, that campaign?
Oh, it went very well. Because, you know, you're a big city mayor and you got the rest of Wayne County. I was running county-wide.
Right.
And I was wondering about, well, you know, reasonably popular in Detroit. I know some of the suburbans.
You've been elected 6 years before countywide. As
well,
sheriff.
That's true. Yeah, that's true.
It wasn't like it was the first time you were ever on a county.
Well, when I ran, they had 5 new positions, and the top person would get a 10-year term, the next 2 would get 8-year term, the next 2 would get 6-year terms, so they would then rotate every 6 years as a circuit judge.
So what did
I
you
won the 10-year term.
Oh, wow, you finished first.
That was a beautiful
Oh,
reward.
wow, that's great. Yeah, that's really good.